am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He is a creative director, no other than Mr. Gavin Bellour.
Wow. It's quite an intro. Thank you so much.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Gavin, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Oh my gosh. I'm a creative director, writer, commercial director, a number of things. I've been making, I don't know, they call it content now, but I used to just call it dumb videos. But I've been working in a number of fields in and around storytelling for 15 years or so, and completely untrained, just sort of stumbled my way through and found a new little vein and did it that way and did it that way. And somehow I kind of ended up having a pretty fun career. And it's always a challenge, but yeah, I get to kind of just make stuff up and try to get people to make it. It's pretty fun.
That's called passion, Mr. Gavin. Thank you so much for sharing your talents to the world. And we are looking for more and more and more empowering creative directing as you are doing. So, what does a creative director do on a daily basis?
It's a good question. It depends on the industry. Obviously, there's a lot of there's experiential creative directors. There's more art director focused still and visual creative directors. I'm a creative director. I do content. So basically, the main job of myself and other creatives I'll work with or creative teams is to essentially in advertising or content creation would basically just be sort of to either take what's called the brief, which is sort of what the client needs and wants or is trying to do. And sometimes you're developing that with the client, and sometimes they're just giving it to you. And then develop ideas that it's kind of a finely crafted thing, believe it or not, although some of the best stuff is just sort of shooting from your hip. But generally, you're trying to merge a conversation that the brand wants to have with their users and their clientele with the messaging they want to say with an overall theme or wrapper we'll call it, as well as sort of how that works across different platforms. So back in the day it was just advertising, then came streaming and digital, so it was YouTube, and now obviously there's a number of different platforms, all which have their different needs and wants and the little things that make things work or don't work, and how you where you place text, and how fast you go and how short or how long or different themes. So it's kind of a weird math problem that we get to solve in a creative way. And then in the end, we, part of the process of developing that with the clients and brands and stakeholders. And that's a lot of conversation and can be a lot of back and forth. Sometimes it's really fast, sometimes it takes months. And then you'll go in the field and you'll make it. So, as a creative director, sometimes you'll supervise the process of selecting production partners. So, a production company, and you'll hire directors and you'll interview those people or figure out who's the right for the job. And then on the day, you'll go and you'll make it and you'll sit in the chair and help with that process of actually making it, and then also see it out through post. I also, as I mentioned, I think I'm a director as well. A lot of the stuff that you're seeing on the site is directing work, a lot of which I had a hand in the creative direction side of it or the writing side of it as well. So I kind of blur the lines a bit. And as a director, you'll come in at that process where the script or the concepts are already developed, and you'll sort of pitch your idea about how we would go about doing this, and you and your production company will go and actually physically make it. So it's a real collaborative. There's a lot of kind of blurring blended lines, especially these days. But it's a pretty fun game. So it's kind of how
Certainly.
it works. Hopefully that made sense.
Yes. So, Mr. Gavin, how does the role of a creative director differ across industries such as advertising, fashion, and entertainment?
That's a really good question. Well, so there's usually like in-house creative directors at almost every brand, who will lead sort of what the overall look and feel and experience is for a user. So Apple, any brand, on some level, somebody has to or wear that hat or have that job. It's sort of what, everything down to the font and the design of the website, to the experience of the user shopping in an Amazon shop or their landing page. And so there's a lot of that. That would be one that would be a little more marketing and commerce directed. There are creative directors in fashion, and the creative directors of those brands tend to I would say veer if it's clothing direct. The ones that I'm familiar with would be a little bit, they have a hand in the design, sometimes being very much at the top of the design, on the top of the design process. It may not be designing every single piece anymore, but there is sort of a big meeting every quarter or the beginning of every season as they're planning every season, which is actually I think 8 in the season now, right? Eight a season now. Yeah, there's all these like sub ones. Maybe it's 12. I don't even know. But they might sort of set the direction for this is what we're doing this year. This is sort of our brand pillars that we always do, and this is kind of what our inspiration is for this season, for example. And they'll sort of supervise that process. But then also they usually have a hand in some of the more top of funnel kind of just sort of what is the brand exuding? What's the communication? What's the conversation we're having? In content, as I mentioned, it's kind of a little more specific to, it could be how do you manage this whole thing as a brand? It could be just this campaign or just this piece. And it can be very broad and spanning, or it can just be literally limited to like one set of three, commercials, for example, and you're sort of writing it or overseeing the writing process. And it can be a lot of management because you're working with teams of people. Sometimes you're iterating so many times that you have often teams, writers work in pairs. So you'll work with one or two teams of writers. You'll have art people. You'll have strategists working with you. So um, some relationships are very sort of top down, and it's a very much kind of you're sitting at the top of it, managing the whole process. Some are much more kind of flat org where I might be writing as much as a junior creative, but we're all just kind of in the mix doing it. And it really just depends on the project. And I quite like being a little more in the trenches. It's a little more suited to me. But sometimes we don't have that advantage, and we just kind of have to sit above and deal a little bit more with clients. So it can really change from project to project, as well as a freelancer. Every project's very different, so it's kind of part of the fun.
Certainly. So, what are the key responsibilities of a creative director in a modern organization?
Well, again, it depends. I mean, again, it depends on the organization. I would say in advertising, content creation, content studio, it is. I would say the simplest terms, it's understanding what the client needs and interpreting that through how they can do that in an entertaining way or an engaging way. Um, and sometimes that involves some educational stuff. You have to explain why something works or it doesn't. There's a bit of salesmanship involved. It can be. But at the end of the day, it really is a two-way street. It's really taking the information, figuring out how to do this, and then leading the team through through the execution of it. I had a actually a really good friend of mine who explained it in a way like almost like a map maker, where you're sort of sitting here, you're looking at the map, and the client tells you, okay, we need to get there, or the strategy team or whatever says we need to get to this part of the map, and your job is to sort of like look at the map, look at the group, uh, look at the client, kind of assess the situation, and then sort of help lead the group, find the right path, lead the group, and figure out a way to get there. And I thought that was a really good analogy.
Certainly. So, let's talk about skills and qualities of being creative director. What are the most important skills?
It's a really good question. So traditionally, a lot of people come up through kind of larger agencies, and there's a very specific track of agencies that are, of sort of a career path that sets these skills forward. So, and there's usually two main tracks. It's art or copy, they call it. So it's, writing or sort of design, visual. And then as they get to creative director, they tend to kind of merge, and you'll have creative directors who are full creative directors over the entire side, both sides, but they usually come from an art or a copy side. Um, I think the key ones, so on the writing side, which is the copy side, which I'm a little bit more familiar with, and is a little more is just obviously writing. Um, I think the ability to communicate really well and listen, and but I think most importantly is you just have to find ways to come up with ideas. And 9 times out of 10, your ideas, the ones you want, don't always get made. Usually don't. Sometimes you get to sell it through, and that's part of your salesmanship. But it is continue. It's like it can be death of a thousand tiny cuts, where you are, much like I'm sure people when they're writing books and they're coming to their editors and they're sort of getting these notes. You have to get a really thick skin and understand how to listen and not take it so personally. whether something's done. And this is true if you're a director on the set, you want to do it a certain way, but the client needs it a certain way. You have to really be able to check your attitude and be able to understand that your job is in the service of the client or the message, and really believe in that and understand that, so you can adapt and really remember that everything you're doing is mostly important to that. But at the end of the day, it's writing, it's visual communication, it's um, being able to build decks, honestly, and communicate via a deck or a presentation, which is something that a lot of people don't necessarily know how to do, and also do it quickly. Like, how do you edit? I think editing is probably one of the biggest keys. And then just leadership and being able to mentor and develop and see talent, because I think good ideas come from anywhere. So I like to incorporate, whether it's the intern or the senior creative or the strategist, or somebody who's just not even involved in that department, somebody in operations who just hangs out in a brainstorm one day. I used to love to pull people in when I had an agency from random places, and we would just sort of have them brainstorm and incorporate. And I think being able to see that and acknowledge it and find people who can really come up with good ideas and then energize them. I think that's a real skill that when you're in the creative director role or executive creative director role, it's a lot more management than actual create, or can be. So being able to sort of delegate but also inspire is a it can be a challenge for some people, and then also stay inspired yourself, because you're day in day out having to come up with new ideas, and some of them are getting shot down, and some of your favorite stuff is getting killed, and the stuff that you don't really love or you didn't think was very good is getting bought, and you're like, so how do you maintain and stay inspired? So I think that's actually a skill too you have to develop, is maintaining one's ability to sort of come in every day without getting exhausted and come up with new ideas. And as much fun as it is, it can be a little exhausting.
Very well said, Mr. Gavin. Very well
I love the
said.
applause. I gotta walk around with this more often. I'm just gonna have. Can you just follow me around and applaud everyone? Great.
Yes, definitely. So let's talk about creative process and
Mhm,
strategy. How
mhm,
do you develop and maintain a strong creative vision for a brand or a
mhm.
company?
It's a really good question. These days there are a lot of stakeholders, especially in the bigger brands. When you're working with the bigger brands, every layer has, 30 and 40 page decks about what the voice is supposed to be, what the campaign, how does it work, what are the needs and wants, what's our way in, what's the tagline, and there's just a lot to digest. And so I think being able to process that and find the key points and like what are the most important points of this to understand, I think is the first step, just to really distill it all, because you can't possibly keep all of it in there. And some of it you can just, you go back and you look at their existing content, you look at what's working, you look at what's not, you look at other brands and competitors. So understanding where they sit and figuring out the key points of that, you can distill it down to, I used to know all these off the top of my head, but there's a lot of work out there about, or books, or about different types of brands, and there's only like 15 types of brands. There's, and the luxury brands sort of tend to do these certain colors and sort of have a conversation with this sort of attitude, and brands who are helpful want to be like this, so there's a lot of science and a lot of sort of branding and marketing work that's been done in that direction. I don't want to destroy it by trying to paraphrase it, but so part of it is understanding that. Then I think it's about consistency and it's about realness. I always prefer brands that kind of are in on the joke with themselves, because that's kind of my style. I love it. Um, when advertising or content creation is not like trying to trick the advertiser and like entertain them and then sell them a message, like kind of you almost earn the right to give a message by entertaining them, and allowing, I think that often humor in particular comes from us seeing ourselves on camera, or on seeing something about ourselves and recognizing some need we have, or some common experience that we have. That's where humor often comes from. And then to be able to tie that in with the solution or the thing we're trying to convey is really the key. You see a lot of advertising where it'll just be like a funny moment or a funny scene, and then they'll just slap their branding on it. There's tons of that out there. It's not great. The great stuff is when they like the joke itself or the payoff itself really ties into the theme of what we're trying to say and explains the brand or whatever. So that's really content related. I think in terms of maintaining a brand over time, I mean it's many people's full-time jobs. and there are a lot of really smart people in. And I have actually found a lot of places too where they, you know, surprisingly, you'll think that somebody's completely buttoned up, and this brand will not have any strategy, and they're just kind of winging it. And the thing in being successful, and I've always been surprised by that. But then I realized that usually somebody has to be doing it. And so it is there, and everybody in those brands or groups, whether it be small or large, has a real innate understanding as a group of what's on brand and what's not in those cases. And it's really about then in that case, just go, okay, let's distill this really quickly. Let's take an hour and like walking through a little bit to figure out like what are our touch points, what are the things that we know we need to do, what's our tone, how do we say it. You don't have to overdo it. I think you can, and people, it's nice to have all that stuff, but for the purposes of what I do, just a few key points, touch points on what this is, and then making sure you can distill those down, and then being able to make sure that those are wound into whatever it is that you're building with them is key.
So, how do you stay ahead of trends while maintaining originality in your work?
It's a really good question too. Trends are funny. I happen to believe, for better or worse, that the storytelling itself doesn't change that much. And I said this, I was told I was a little bit radical to say that, and I don't think so. I don't think storytelling's changed at all. I think we've been doing this stuff since we were, painting, you know, painting things on cave walls and telling stories around the campfire. And this is kind of the innate way that we as humans convey information and pass along wisdom and, make each other laugh and connect. And I think that's the essence of what we're talking about. Just because we're doing it in the service of a brand doesn't necessarily make it any different. Obviously, now we're distilling that out through any number of different platforms. But I think that um, the human connection for me is the most important. So I always look for the simplicity of that and then try to bake that around the different trends. It's really difficult to stay on top, especially now. There's, I mean, even in the last 10 years, really, it was one platform and then there was two for like 5 years. And now there's like seven. And five of them have very similar but very different needs, and then within that there's trends, and they change week to week, day to day, month to month. And something, by the time I have this great idea, it's reactive and this is a trend right now, by the time you actually write it, get it approved, you know it's happened to me before, where you come up with this great idea and you do it, and then someone on the team is like, that's really passe, it's going to make the brand look really bad because it's kind of like been overdone already, and it happens so fast. So to be honest, I think what I found, particularly these days, the brands that are the most successful, I think, not, and this is not every case, because I think there's a lot of really, really smart people in a lot of different places, but I love to tap young, green, enthusiastic, fun talent who just is native to this stuff. And rather than like be a creative who's done like super hyper experience and understands some of the nuances of production and what you can get made and what you can't, and the client stuff and how to wrap it all around all these different things that we talk about. I just think the more ideas you have and the more enthusiasm you have, we can figure out how to kind of like frame that into a brand messaging. And I think it's easier to go to that direction. And enthusiasm counts for a lot. So I love working with like young copywriters, young directors, young art directors, anybody who just has good ideas and understands it and just gets enthusiasm and is open to like, okay, because initially it's gonna be like, that's a great idea. And you're like, well, what does that say about the brand? And then you have to have that conversation. You have to train it a little bit and you have to be the person. But I think that the people who really understand some of these newer platforms, they're really fun to tap and integrate with people who are very experienced and understand sort of higher level marketing stuff. And so I find that blend is both fun because it's very refreshing, but it also comes up with new ideas. You don't get jaded, and you have this like insight of somebody who's just looking at this daily and understands and wants to do something cool and has a better, more innate understanding of it than I could ever do it, because I got 4 kids. You know what I mean? I can't be on TikTok all day. I can't, so I try to come from it from like, there are sort of fundamentals that we can always sort of agree with or maybe disagree with from time to time, as long as we know why. And how do you translate that through these methodologies and these platforms? So, I think that combination, that juxtaposition, creates a lot of creative tension, and I think it can be really fun. And so I find that that's probably one of the better ways to do it. And you see that a lot with brands where they're just hiring creatives and that kind of, or hiring content creators and influencers. And I think that's one way to do that. But I think also in the sort of writing process, I think it's really fun to just incorporate young people who are really enthusiastic and sort of help shape things with them, and then if they're interested, they can continue on.
So, Mr. Gavin, what will be your advice for those people out there who want to be an excellent creative director like you?
Well, I think for any look, I got into it like I didn't go to film school. I didn't go through advertising, anything. I just kind of started making stuff. And originally I was starting on a low scale, and I would say a couple pieces of advice. One that I learned was I just wanted to make stuff, and I really liked it. So I spent a lot of money on my business cards and had like a really fancy business card
Hmm.
that was like paper press and letterpress and just had like a taste level to it that I thought was really important. And I'm not sure if this would work now, but it worked then. And I made a website, and I had a brand that was mine. And I, would say they a lot. And I had a pretend email account that was my assistant. And I would just, I was just me. And I would hire
Mhm.
people to come in and out. And when I would get gigs, and I would bring in friends who were freelancers or whatever. And kind of that's kind of how it all started for me. But it was ultimately just writing things that I wanted to make. So you obviously have to have a passion for it on some level, but it wasn't, I was in other pursuits as well. And that's just kind of what took off. And then became part of a larger company. And that's where it really took off. But I would say just always be looking for opportunities and always be creating. And whether that's your own stuff or try to find opportunities to partner with brands. I mean, brands are just a way to go make stuff ultimately. If you think about it in one way as a filmmaker, we want to go make these big films, we want to go do all this cool stuff. But there is this great merge between art and commerce, and you can leverage, and everybody wins by going and creating really fun, interesting things, whether that be TikTok videos or Instagram reels or a 10-minute brand film or a documentary. Those are all ways where and that's why this area exists, because it sort of serves both sides. So I would say this is a long-winded answer, but I'll get there, I promise. Um, it's essentially just you need to find people who can partner with you, and who can kind of see your voice, and then you can kind of also see their voice, and you sort of partner with them. And by doing so, if you can always try to punch up one level. So, for example, sell yourself one level above where you think you are, and try to make that piece of content that you're creating for this other person or this brand or whatever it is, if you're in this field, or even if you're doing it for yourself, try to make it one notch above that, and put the money on the screen. Do anything you can to get it even one notch above where, so it's two notches above where you are, so that you can use that the next time you want to sell somebody. And then pitch them you're a little one notch up above that, like you're more capable than you are. And then you make it, always just try to keep using it, selling it, positioning yourself, and creating stuff that's just better every single time. And when you do that, you're not pocketing the money, you're pushing it. Obviously, you have to get paid, but you're pushing it to the next level, and you're expanding and you're keeping a vision out. And I think that will help you. It's effectively just a ladder, but don't be modest. Go in there and figure out what you do well, do that really well, and try to do the thing that you really want to do better, and push it in that direction every single time. The other thing I would say is that you have to just stay fresh. And it's taken me a long time to figure it out. I ended up journaling on this last 2 years, and I didn't before. I would get totally burned out. And something for me of just like waking up, and sometimes it can be a drag, and you're like, oh, I don't feel like it, and you don't. I don't do it every day, but I do it almost every day. But like even a little bit of gratitude, or I'm not really like woo woo, but just like I've found that waking up, and before everybody gets up, I get a cup of coffee and I sit down. I have a journaling program called Day One, and I just bash out my thoughts. And sometimes that's work, sometimes that's not work. And I found that, and also if I have ideas throughout the day, I can throw it in there. And I do it digitally. I know people who carry books around with them, but I think keeping track of those ideas and also just getting that stuff out sometimes opens up, and you feel immediately energized about, half the time I do that, I feel like even if I'm really exhausted or tired or I'm like stressed, I'll just feel so much better. And it just, helps you kind of freshen up your day and start the day new. And as a creative person, whether that's journaling or there's some other thing that you can do, it could be a number of different things. But for me, that's really worked. And it really is super, super important to be able to kind of like just face this every day and be willing to go. And I mean, when you're going to make some of this stuff, it's crazy. Like you have, $10 and you've got 5 elephants and you got to do it in an hour, and the sun's going down and it's about to start raining and you have to figure out how it makes work. It's really silly because it feels like a real big deal. At the end of the day, you're just selling stuff, but it's high pressure, and there's a lot of people involved, and you have to stay fresh. You have to stay above it. You can't get sucked into the drama of it. You just have to look at it, solve a problem, and do it quickly, and then move on. And I think that being able to stay fresh and be able to kind of figure out what works for you as a creative person, whatever field you're in, um, I think finding those ways to keep yourself fresh and it's almost is really really key. Really.
Certainly. Thank you for your advice, Mister. And to sum up our discussion for today, what will be your short term and long term goals as a creative director?
Oh, that's a good question. Short-term goals. Well, I'm working on a feature film right now. I've had a number of them in development that haven't really panned out. So I think getting this one made in the next year would be kind of a shorter term goal. It's been something I've wanted to do and expand to a longer form. And I've worked around it for a while, but we're actually getting a bit of momentum. So that would be a short term goal. And long term goal, I guess would be able to. I don't think I'll ever stop what I'm doing because I really do enjoy it. But to just keep branching out and expanding and loop in bigger fields and be able to be as productive at this and have much fun doing this in 10 or 20 years. I don't really intend on retiring. I think that I think the goal would be to not feel like I want to retire, to like wake up and be like, what can I make today? And whether that be teaching or helping others or just being lightly involved on a high level, I think that would be a really fulfilling, way to finish things off. I guess would be a nice way to say it. So I don't know. I think maintain what I'm doing and try to just get better at it and keep enjoying it. I think, and I think all of us who are creatives, I think, are pretty lucky to be able to call that a living, and whether we make a living at it or not yet. And I think just I feel really lucky, and to be able to do that for the rest of my life will be just enough for a long term goal. I think.
Mr. Gavin Bellour, good luck to your goals
Thank
and
you.
looking forward for more and more and more creative directing that what you're doing. So can you please invite our listeners to support your books or your directing?
Oh yeah, you can just. I mean, if you want to check out my work, you go to gavinballure.com. It's there. You can find me on Instagram, which is I post mostly my kids, but I'm trying to do more work. I have an AI project that I'm working on that will be launching sometime next year. That's going to be a content series. It'll be really fun. So if you send me an email if you're interested in talking, or if there's anything I can do to help you, or you can find that on the website, or just find me on Instagram, and I'll make an announcement there, or a few other places when that comes out.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Gavin Bellour because if you support him more and more, empowering directing or more books to come. So, Mr. Gavin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
More to come, people. See you soon. You are most welcome to come back, Mr. Gavin, if you have something to promote